chat, which is coming from Poland. For those of you who saw my last live chat, you have noticed I was in a different vehicle. I'm back in my old vehicle because I had to bring it here. And the thing is, it's a very bare vehicle now because just about everything of use has been stripped out of it to go into the new one. So that's where I am. So as always with a live chat, you can ask questions about the theme, about what I'm talking about, but as always, please try to keep the language appropriate. Now, today, what I'd like to do is actually look back at 1 year of war, and when I think of it now, where I was 1 year ago today and where I am now. Okay, there's not much difference, as it turns out, in geographical difference, but what I've actually seen and experienced in that 1 year has been quite, I don't know, striking, I suppose is the word. I would not have imagined that things that I've seen, I would have seen 1 year ago, quite utterly horrific things in Ukraine. But let's go back a bit more than 1 year to the first thing that was announced. I can recall the day very clearly. It was a Wednesday, the 10th of November. And on that day, I remember the day very clearly. Well, I do tend to remember dates anyway, apart from that was the day after my birthday. And on that day, it was announced that there was a Russian buildup on the border, and this was announced on by the US government. And I would have seen it on one of the television channels, which one finds on the internet. And so no longer do we have to go into archives to get stuff out. We can just turn on YouTube and look up the news items for the days we are interested in. By the end of November of 2021, there was the Ukrainian government reported that there were 92,000 now Russian troops on their border. Within a week, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, warned of consequences if there was an invasion. And those consequences, as we saw, were within a couple of months was to actually offer the Ukrainian president a ride out of his country. Now, one of the arguments that the Kremlin side has constantly put forward, that this is a defensive measure, that it wants to stop Ukraine joining NATO, despite the fact that Putin himself very clearly said in 2001, and again repeated, I believe, in 2008, that it was no business of Russia if Ukraine could join NATO, or it didn't join NATO. Putin himself, in a conversation with Lord Roberts, who was then head of NATO, stated that what does Russia have to do to join? And Lord Roberts said, you've got to fill in the application form. He said, Putin, no, Russia's too big for that. He wants NATO to apply to Russia. And these are the same arguments which these pro-Nazi trolls are knocking around on the internet, and which the Kremlin propagandists put out today, that it's NATO somehow occupies countries and then forces them to join. On the contrary, if countries want to join NATO, they have to fill out the application form and fill out and agree to the conditions. And one of those conditions is that they don't grandfather in any disputes. Putin said on the 17th of November 2021 that he wanted a prohibition on Ukraine joining NATO, which Ukrainian government rejected. But in any case, you cannot have countries dictating what others can or cannot do. It's a bit like the United Kingdom, for example, dictating that Ireland can't join the European Union or something along those lines. It's totally ridiculous to even think so. Now, by the middle of January, Russian troops started arriving in Belarus. and this for military exercises. And the idea of using military exercises as a prelude to war is something which has actually gone on in the 19th century. You can find it, even 18th century, you can find this as it's an excuse used at build-up before. Now, once more, in 19th of January, once more, Joe Biden said that Russia will be accountable for an invasion. But again, I don't think the Russians took the threat particularly seriously. Having said that, there were some NATO troops which were put on standby. By the end of January, where there were exercises in Russian-occupied Crimea, and large numbers of troops were in that. Then furthermore, in the middle of February, Russia and Belarus began large-scale maneuvers, which were supposed to end on the 20th of February. At the same time, the escalation of war happened in the Donbass occupied areas. Hello, Colin. Well, effectively occupied Ukraine. Now, one of the things I can recall very clearly from this time is when it was reported on World is One news, and I think it was Deutsche Welle repeated the same thing, that Russian troops were actually leaving Crimea, because this was put out on a Russian propaganda website. But as it turned out, and I can think, can't they understand which side the sun is on? They're not leaving Crimea, they're going into Crimea. And I think I even posted this on my Facebook site as well. I should have checked that before I came on now. But I posted it somewhere anyway. On the 21st of February 2022, Putin made a really odd speech, and it's this speech which lots of people have tried analyzing it and talking about it. And in this speech, he said the following, that the situation in the Donbass has reached a critical stage, and Ukraine is not just our neighbor, it is an indisputably inalienable part of our history, culture and spiritual area. Now, so I'm sort of paraphrasing this, but it's I think I've got that more or less accurate. I've got one or two notes in front of me as well from what he said. So the Putin then went into his idea of Soviet history, and he claimed that Ukraine was a creation of the Bolsheviks in 1917. This is a load of nonsense. What actually happened as a result of the Russian Revolution was that Ukraine declared itself independent, and this people within Ukraine, and then this independent Ukraine was put down by the Bolsheviks. Now, according to Putin, the idea that Ukraine is an independent country was part of the communist way of appeasing the nationalities. Now, bear in mind that the overwhelming, no, I'm not exaggerating here, but the majority of people living in the Soviet Union were people-occupied peoples. The same way today is that in Russia, there's a huge amount of people who are not Russian living in Russia. They are ethnic minorities, and it's these ethnic minorities who are doing the fighting largely. People that theoretically have certain independence and certain rights. I mean, the most clear case of all is Chechnya, where the rulers can do what they want as long as they swear loyalty, like in a feudal system, to Putin. So anyway, so according to Putin, Putin's announcement about Moldova. Unless if that just happened now, I don't know about it, Colin. Sorry, I haven't, but I can imagine what he said. So actually, one of the things I will mention, those things I've started on ethnic minorities, is in Moldova is a very curious case. Now, in the time that communist Russia, Soviet Union, and Nazi Germany were allies, they attacked. Soviet Union attacked a number of its neighbors, and one of the neighbors it attacked was Romania. And therefore, the part of what the country we know today as Moldova was occupied in 1940. However, the part which is now Transnistria had previously been part of the Soviet Union. And that had been created as a sort of Moldovan independent area. And there's another part which is today Ukraine, which was also part of Romania in 1940. So that Putin's got this perverted view of history, which sees these peoples as being part of the Russian sphere. So he wants to keep the Russian Empire together, and that these peoples must be part of the Russian Empire if they like it or they don't like it. Now, what's quite odd is that Joseph Stalin was the commissar for nationalities. He was supposedly the expert in the Bolshevik leadership on the different nationalities. And despite the fact that Putin has this great admiration for Stalin and Stalin's achievements, if that's what they can be called, he may have had some blame being put on Lenin and Stalin for allowing these national areas to evolve. Now, Putin, another thing is that he blames Mikhail Gorbachev for the breakup and the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the collapse of historical Russia, as Putin puts it. Now, one thing that needs to be pointed out is that in the age of empires, lots of countries occupied other areas, and in some cases they killed off the local population. In the United Kingdom, occupied 1/4 of the world's globe, but it did have the good sense to leave these occupied areas. Although it left them in a rather bad way, but that's a story for is another time. Putin's argued that in many of these states that it was Russia which bailed all these countries out in the 1990s. That it took the Soviet Union's debt, for example. He said that Ukraine claimed part of the Soviet Union's gold reserves, which in my opinion had every right to. Simon asks, is Putin also claiming Bessarabia? Would he claim the Baltic states as well? Well, clearly, based on his speech, I'm trying to interpret his speech of the 21st of February of last year. I believe he isn't. He's claiming everything. But the problem with this historical sort of stuff, when people sort of claim areas, it's not clear what they're claiming. Is he claiming the place I am at now, which 100 years ago, was part of Germany, or I don't know. Question, would Putin say what he really means? No, he wouldn't, because I don't honestly think he knows himself. And this is the problem often with nationalists, or like conspiracy theorists, you cannot peg them down to one thing because they don't know. And so because he doesn't know, he can't say. But he can say that Ukraine, for example, is part of Russia, according to him. The same ways I think he would say that the Baltic states were part of Russia. The same ways I think as if he got away with this, where would he attack next? Would he attack Kazakhstan? No, not likely. Would he attack Uzbekistan or the other parts? I don't think so. If the governments were sort of fascist inspired and showed due respect to him. as far as I'm concerned, I very strongly believe that the events in Kazakhstan, where the Kazakh government, there was massive protests, maybe the Kazakh government could have been overthrown in January 21. Or maybe it wouldn't have been, but there were massive protests. Putin doesn't want protests. He sent Russian troops to Kazakhstan. They were on the streets. They stopped the rioters rioting, and so he got what he wanted. He kept a friendly regime in power in Kazakhstan. Now, Putin also claimed that post-Soviet Ukraine was infected with the virus of nationalism and corruption. Now, I would certainly not disagree that there was a lot of corruption in Ukraine. The reason why there's a lot of corruption because they're using the Soviet system. Mind you, it's a bit, it really is the pot calling the kettle black when you've got someone like Putin complaining about nationalism. Here we have somebody who absolutely lives up to the Nazi ideal, and he's complaining about that and corruption. Russia is a kleptocracy. Putin didn't invent the kleptocracy. He inherited it and used it for his own private benefit. Russia was a kleptocracy. Putin himself in the early 90s was clearly involved in criminal activity when he was the deputy mayor of Petersburg, siphoning off aid, selling aid, which was on the black market and pocketing the proceeds. There was a criminal investigation. Of course, the criminal investigation came to naught. Now, one of the things is in Ukraine, there were various revolutions as such. I was in at a real estate, when I was then working in real estate, and I was at a real estate fair in south of France in March 2004, and I can very strongly recall I was talking to this lady from Kiev, and she was saying to me that she had every intention of leaving Kiev, Ukraine, but because of the revolution, they had hope for the future, and therefore she was going to stay. Well, okay, that was 18 years ago, or 19 years ago now. I wonder what she's thinking. I just got a question. What do I think of China cozying up to Putin? I think this has to be expected. China can dominate Putin. In fact, anything they want from him, they'll get it now. So I think there is a bit of a risk for us. I mean, when I say us, I mean the West, the West civilized democratic countries, and I think that this could be. I think this could be dangerous. I think really it's been really stupid allowing the trade terms that China's had for the last 25 years, which has given it this economic benefit. So the Chinese Communist Party, which can therefore you can use slave labor to produce things, and which we can buy cheaply and fill up our stores, and likes of Walmart, which I think in the United States is almost entirely stuff from China. And what first of all, think of the people who are being exploited in this manner in China. That's the number one thing. But the second thing is it's what it's actually done to destabilize our own manufacturing bases. That's number one. But also the producing a new potential threat from them. So I think it's a really bad thing. And I think that China would see Russia as a country it could sort of swallow up and maybe even put its own puppet regime in. Anyway, yes, and John writes, it didn't help that Yeltsin was a very bad alcoholic and probably didn't fully understand what assigning Putin entailed. Yes, this is absolutely correct, because when you look at Putin when he got his job in 1999 as the prime minister, he looks all sort of sheepish and shy, and he looks like he can be sort of ordered around, and he certainly behaved in a very deferent manner to Yeltsin, and because the other prime ministers, been there one day and gone the next. So this with Putin, it's really, really odd that this character who looks as though he's really not going to assert himself at all, then does what he has done. It's not, in this case, I've got to draw this distinction between him and Hitler. For example, Hitler, he was a loudmouth shouting around from the early 1920s, asserting himself and his dream and his dreams. Putin was really, really quiet. And having said that, he did the apartment bombings, which was clearly done by the KGB, I've forgotten the word now, the secret police and FSB, and so he did order these mass killings of Russian people, then trying to blame it on Chechens. And that was when Yeltsin was still in control. So maybe he wasn't as deferent and obedient to Yeltsin as it appeared. Putin called the 2014 revolution, or I don't think that's the right word, but a coup d'etat. And this is, you see this with these neo-Nazis on the internet, that they often call it a coup d'etat or something like that, or it's the United States has done it and all the rest of it. He's also claimed that Ukrainian government had acted laws discriminating against Russian-speaking people in Ukraine. Now, this is a bit, again, it's like calling the kettle black. Well, you know, people in, the first thing, the law in Russia is that Russian is the language, discriminating against the huge amount of ethnic minorities in Russia. But Putin's got double standards. I agree that the language law was not well thought out. Somebody who studied linguistics at university. So I would actually, I do feel that they should have thought about this a lot more and what was actually done. The thing is this, though, the Ukrainian language has been persecuted by Russian authorities. In 1879, the governor of Kiev and Podolia wrote that the Ukrainian had to be careful about the Ukrainian language, because if they allowed it to be spoken in schools, who knows where this might end up? It might even be spoken in the law courts. Now, the Ukrainian language is seen, people look down on it. Even somebody like Trotsky, who was amongst the communists somewhat liberal, I would say, he attacked the Ukrainian, sorry, by communist standards, somewhat liberal. I'm not comparing him to somebody in modern days, but he was he attacked the Ukrainian language. They shouldn't be speaking Ukrainian. They should be speaking Russian. But you can't just go up to somebody and tell them to speak a different language and they're going to do it. And so this is another thing, is Ukrainians had this reputation of not being very intelligent. But then again, if they couldn't go to school because the schools were in Russian, a language they didn't speak, and they had no chance of getting an education. So jokes about the Ukrainians is being stupid or something like that is not fair. Not only that, we have what Stalin did was the deliberate attempt at exterminating a large amount of the Ukrainian-speaking population through the Holodomor. Now, in 3.9 million people approximately, and that's the lowest end of the calculations, died in 1932-33. The Ukrainian-speaking population of the North Caucasus, where the Ukrainian language was widely spoken, no longer exists. And And Collins just corrected me by saying that Kerensky was a liberal, but Trotsky was more enlightened. Yeah, well, actually, Kerensky wasn't all that liberal, but Trotsky was definitely the most enlightened of the communist leadership. In fact, some of them were quite enlightened. I don't want to attack them all. Just that it was the nasty one, really nasty ones who actually took over. Lenin, well, they all agreed with Lenin at the beginning, but then Stalin. So the now, another point about what Putin said, and this is really absurd, is that Ukraine wanted to create nuclear weapons. Ukraine is the only country that's ever given up its nuclear weapons. It did so according to the Budapest Memorandum. I did a video of it end of February of last year, and that it did so because 3 countries agreed to recognize its territorial independence. And the person who signed for Russia was the same Sergei Lavrov, who today is Putin's foreign minister and one of those leading the attack on Ukraine. So, and the other 2 countries are the United States and the United Kingdom. That is why the United States and the United Kingdom have an absolute obligation to defend Ukraine, no matter what. Oh, evening in Warsaw. Yes, it's evening here as well. I could show you if I opened this. Now, another claim that Putin made was that during in 2014, effectively terrorists from the Russian military security units entered into the Donbass. Admittedly, there were some locals, but I have talked to people in depth in the Donbass who've told me what they saw then. These people were not, as they put it out, as I understand, some Kremlin propaganda put out that these are people who didn't want Ukraine to join the European Union. These were from Russia. They were using weapons that were only used by the Russian army. I've spoken to police officers who were there, who witnessed the storming of police buildings, and that's what they told me. So the eyewitnesses confirm in 2014 there may have been some Ukrainians amongst them, but this was planned by the Russians. Now, for Putin then to say that that Ukraine wasn't abiding by the Minsk agreements, that is, it in itself, it is quite absurd. Ukraine certainly was torn apart by the events of 2014, which allowed the occupation of the Crimea and the attack from Donbass on the rest of Ukraine. I think that Ukraine managed to survive this because of the depth of feeling and people from below, because there was a vacuum in the government, and the government then chose to actually do nothing. Anyway, the result of this speech was that Putin decided to take a long overdue decision and recognize the independence of Donetsk and Luhansk, both of them which are people's republics, that's to say communist in thought, and that is why you see all the neo-Nazis on the internet supporting these communist states. Now, I think I ought to put out what my thoughts were at the time. And my thoughts were that this would end there. But one thing I would say about this speech is, and this isn't just my idea, but it's others, I believe that this is laying the groundwork for genocide. It's more or less Putin saying that Ukrainians do not exist as an ethnic group, whereas clearly they do exist. The same as Hitler saying that Jews don't exist, where they clearly did exist. But this is the incitement to wipe them out. And that is why they have to, fight. So, on the 23rd of February of last year, I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said to me, "What do you think?" And I said, "No, that's it. You'll occupy these Donetsk and Luhansk, and that'll be it." That wasn't it. He invaded the rest of the country. But I think I ought to save that for a different video. Yeah, so Colin writes, in the Donbass, none of the militia ever wore insignia identification, but their vehicles did, and that's evidence. Yes, and I would say also the weapons that they use. But if, for example, in 2014, Vice News, Shimon Ostrovsky was a brilliant journalist, Russian at that. He although American now, he asked people in the Crimea where these little green men, where do they come from? And he said, I remember this one, and he said, "Oh, Moscow." So this was utterly planned. I mean, it was a brilliant coup. I'm not going to deny the brilliance behind it. I mean, evil in the same way as there are certain things that the Nazis did which could be described as brilliant, but utterly evil. And so from that, one can maybe appreciate the tactics, but not what the aims were. Anyway, so Cleo writes, Putin won't be able to sell any pencils on any street corner in the world. No, I don't think he will be able to. So, evil does not equal stupid. Yes, because somebody is evil, it doesn't mean that they're stupid. If I may, just on a slight, coming off the point, I've actually prepared something on a robbery which took place in the United Kingdom on the 8th of August, 1963. And this is called the Great Train Robbery. And the person who masterminded this, he called it his Sistine Chapel, this robbery. And it's often been quoted as being really brilliant. It wasn't, as you will find out from my video when I get to do it. But I can admire the planning of the attack on Crimea, but it's the evil, though, that stands behind it. And this is Ukraine. Ukrainians have no choice. They have to fight. It's not like you're being occupied by another country. It's not like sort of Belgium attacking the United Kingdom and thinking, oh well, it doesn't matter, Belgium, I could live there. It's not all that bad. It isn't like that at all. They are committing crimes on a massive basis, and anybody who goes there can see it. I've talked to people who, for example, when the buildings collapsed, they shooting at them indiscriminately, and then they won't let the people in those buildings be taken out. I have spoken to people in that position. It's horrendous what they're doing. In the Donbass is flattened. It's a sea of mud. I mean, I was out there in November, and it's horrendous. Anyway, yeah. So, yes, Colin, on the Great Train Robbery, but I'll come on that in a different video. So, thanks for watching. I thought I ought to do that one. Tomorrow I've got a shorts video about another communist crime committed by the Kremlin or their in this case their toadies in Warsaw, which happened 60 years ago on the day. And 1953, that's not 60, that is 70 years ago. And thanks, Cleo. And on Friday I've got a video which I'm quite proud of, actually, a little bit of research I did, which I filmed in Germany and I put together in London a couple of months ago. Thanks, John. Thanks everybody for listening, and all the best from me in Wrocław, Poland. Bye for now. Oh, Cleo says, remember Sophie Scholl. it wasn't today. It was a couple of days ago, Cleo. I was going to do it on Sophie, but I just didn't. Because I've got this new job, and I was sitting on that. But 2 nights ago, I drove past the town she came from, and I thought, oh yeah, I should stop now and do it, but I didn't. Anyway, but it wasn't today. I will do a video on Sophie Scholl because she deserves it. She deserves to be remembered. Okay. Thanks, Cleo. Thanks, Selmon. Thanks, John. All the best. Bye for now.